Good afternoon. This is the Friday afternoon Eastern Area Fire Weather Briefing for May 29th. The Eastern Area remains at Preparedness Level 2, as does the National Preparedness Level remain at 2. Looking at what occurred in May so far, temperatures overall have been near to slightly below normal across for most of the area. However, it has been near to slightly above normal across the mid-Atlantic coast into portions of eastern New England, mainly due to the record heat observed more than a week ago. Recently, however, the below normal anomalies across much of the Midwest have started to decrease due to the well above normal temperatures observed there over the past several days. Precipitation has been quite dry across much of the Midwest, with many areas receiving less than 50% of normal precipitation. Recent precipitation from last week greatly improved the anomalies in the mid-Atlantic, although some areas remain a little bit drier than normal from eastern Maryland into New Jersey. Precipitation has been above normal for the month from southern Indiana and Ohio into northern New England. The latest watches, warnings, and advisories from the National Weather Service shows that wind advisories are out for portions of eastern New England, along with storm warnings along the New England coast. However, turning our attention to fire weather, there are special weather statements for elevated fire danger in portions of northern Minnesota as well as the northern LP of Michigan. Looking for the forecast for tomorrow, Saturday, temperatures will remain above normal, especially in Minnesota. Temperatures in the Northeast are likely to be below normal due to the cold front that is moving through today. Temperatures there are more commonly going to be in the 50s and 60s versus the 80s in the western tier. RH is going to remain quite low in much of the Great Lakes, although slightly higher than past several days, but still an average of 25 to 30% is expected from northern Minnesota into the northern LP. RH may be locally lower in some pockets where it could reach the upper teens tomorrow. Winds overall will also be a little bit breezier tomorrow, especially in the Great Lakes, with some easterly winds of 10 to 15 miles an hour across much of Michigan into Wisconsin, and perhaps some stronger southeasterly winds in western Minnesota of 15 to 20 miles an hour. In the Northeast, general northerly winds around 10 miles an hour expected. As a result, the significant fire potential is expected to remain very low across most of the area. However, fire danger will continue to slowly escalate in much of the Great Lakes, especially the northern Great Lakes, with moderate significant fire potential expected tomorrow. As we move into Sunday, temperatures overall will follow a similar pattern, although some modification is expected in the east. The east will have temperatures in the 60s and 70s versus the 80s in much of the western tier. RH will continue to remain quite low in the Great Lakes, possibly dropping a little bit from Saturday, with widespread 20 to 30% RH expected from northern Minnesota to the LP. Locally lower RH as low as 15% is possible, especially in portions of northern Wisconsin and the western UP. Winds, though, will be a little bit lighter on Sunday, and more generally less than 10 miles an hour from Wisconsin to the East Coast. However, some locally breezy southeast winds will continue across western Minnesota, generally averaging around 15 miles an hour. Any precipitation is expected to remain in the western tier, mainly focused over southwest Iowa into Missouri. The precipitation forecast that you see there for Minnesota is very uncertain, and if anything falls, it will be isolated and very light. On Monday, temperatures will increase further across the western tier, approaching 90 in portions of northern Minnesota as well as Missouri. As you move farther east into the Northeast, temperatures in the 60s and 70s will be common. RH will continue to remain very low at from 20 to 30% from northern Minnesota into the LP, with the locally lower RH possibly as low as 15% in portions of northern Wisconsin and the western UP once again. Winds will be slightly stronger from their lull on Sunday, with generally east to southeast winds across Minnesota of 10 to 15 miles an hour and generally closer to 10 miles an hour across much of Wisconsin and Michigan. In the Northeast, winds will remain fairly light and from the north to northwest. Precipitation will again be more focused across Missouri, and any precipitation that falls, as indicated here in Minnesota, will be very isolated and light. A few light showers are also possible in eastern New England. Significant fire potential will continue to elevate from Saturday into Sunday into Monday, with much of the Great Lakes compact being designated as a moderate risk for significant fires. Along the East Coast, due to the persistent drying, some low risk has been indicated, mainly for a potential increase in IA in more of the pine-dominated areas. Looking ahead to the medium range, the dry pattern is expected to persist and may become more critical as we go into Tuesday and Wednesday. The strong high pressure to our north over Ontario is expected to sag southward, bringing more dry air into the central and eastern Great Lakes. In addition, winds are likely to increase, especially across the western tier, which brings an additional concern. Currently, in the area of greatest confidence, from the Arrowhead into the northern LP, there is a high risk due to the burn environment of very dry conditions, hot temperatures, and low RH. Some low-level instability is also possible in these areas. Far to the west, portions of northwest Minnesota are also a concern, especially with the increasing winds on Wednesday. As we head into Thursday and Friday, the cold front will start to approach and will start to increase the winds. This may continue the elevated fire environment into much of Michigan on Thursday and possibly into Friday, depending on the timing of the front. This front is not particularly strong and will not have a tremendous amount of moisture to work with. Scattered showers and thunderstorms will develop along the front, but not all areas will receive wetting rain late next week. Areas that don't receive wetting rain may be susceptible for new ignitions from lightning. Looking ahead to the week 2 outlook, the ridge that is currently over Ontario is expected to weaken early next week as that front approaches, but is looking more likely next weekend into the following week. The ridge is going to rebuild over the Great Lakes into Ontario. How this ridge develops is still uncertain. There is a chance it could pull more moisture up from the Gulf through the plains into Minnesota. That is why there is a low probability of above normal precipitation for northwest Minnesota. However, the ridge is looking more likely to set up, the ridge axis is looking more likely to set up along the Mississippi River, which means that much of Wisconsin and Michigan will be in a drier northerly flow with dry air coming out of Canada, possibly increasing the fire weather concerns once again as we head into mid-June. Looking at the precipitation observed for the last 7 days, the precipitation shows the rainfall that occurred last weekend along the Ohio River to the mid-Atlantic, with moderate rainfall into the Northeast. Precipitation in the Great Lakes was more scattered, with only localized areas receiving more than 1 inch, and some areas remaining dry, especially across Wisconsin and the UP. Precipitation for the next 7 days shows that much of the Great Lakes into the mid-Atlantic will remain dry. The precipitation in eastern New England is mostly expected to fall today, with the system moving through. Highest confidence for rainfall shown in the image is in western Iowa into Missouri over the next 7 days. The precipitation into Minnesota and Wisconsin is expected to be much more scattered than what is depicted here. The heaviest amounts of 1 to 1.5 inches, as shown here, will be very localized, with only a few locations receiving that amount of rainfall. Most areas that receive wetting rainfall will only receive a quarter to a third of an inch, with a few areas receiving no precipitation whatsoever. Looking at the observed Duff moisture code for today shows that the Duff moisture code continues to dry as a result of the warm and dry conditions, with the highest values shown from the western UP into northern Minnesota. The latest U.S. drought monitor shows that drought has improved slightly in the mid-Atlantic due to last weekend's precipitation. However, abnormally dry conditions are starting to increase across the Midwest, especially in Minnesota and Wisconsin, due to the drier than normal May that has been observed. Looking to the Great Lakes Fire and Fuels Initial Spread Index, for today it was elevated across most of the northern LP. As we move into tomorrow with the increased winds and lower RH, values will increase further, especially across Minnesota. Higher values above 10 are expected across much of the area, with some values exceeding 20 across portions of Minnesota. As we head into Sunday, the dry conditions will continue, but with the lighter winds, the ISI drops quite a bit, but remains more elevated in Minnesota due to the stronger winds observed there. As we head into Monday, winds will begin to increase across the LP, the UP, and much of northern Minnesota, with values remaining elevated there. Just to summarize, very warm and dry conditions are expected in the Great Lakes into early next week, with the warmest conditions in Minnesota, though many of the driest conditions will be in Michigan and Wisconsin, especially northern Wisconsin and the western UP. It'll be dry for most of the region the next 7 days, except for northern New England, which will receive precipitation tonight into tomorrow, and the western Big Rivers. A critical pattern is possible mid next week, with dry air coming out of Canada preceding an approaching cold front. Low RH and hot, dry conditions will be followed by potential winds and lightning. Thank you for listening to the Eastern Area Fire Weather Briefing this Friday.